Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again on this Wednesday evening, Wednesday night, it is Talk with Inayat Wadi. And today being the 3rd of October, just a few days before we will be observing 1 year of resistance, 1 year of determination, steadfastness, perseverance, conviction, faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also a year of a genocide, untold brutality, and we've learned and we've seen in the last year that Gaza, Palestine, a turning point, and Palestine and Gaza being our barometer as an ummah as we head towards October the 7th. And as we approach a year to mark this Israeli genocidal campaign, and also at the same time, we look at 1 year of the determination of Palestinian resistance. It is absolutely important, it is critical for us as a Muslim Ummah to continue in our support, to continue talking out. And at the end of the day, it is it is a divine obligation, and it is a fulfillment of our religious responsibility to speak out, to proclaim the truth, and to strive as human beings, to strive as a Muslim Ummah to support and to repel the aggression of the aggressors against Al Aqsa Mosque and also the people of Palestine. Now, we've seen quite a turn of events in the last 2 weeks, and Gaza still suffering the bombardment from the Zionist entity, but we've seen the extension into Lebanon. And last night, I'm not too sure if it came as a surprise, but we've seen Iran responding by sending 200 rockets to Israel. Now, it is against this background that we are having this discussion this evening, and we are talking about the genocide in Gaza and also in Lebanon, possibly against this strategic madness of the Zionist regime versus the strategic patience of the struggle and to strike back. And this is the reason why we are joined by three of our guests, and I'm hoping Dr. Sami Al-Arian will be joining us, but we've got Brother Bilal Abdul Karim and Professor Nidal. I see Professor Sami Al-Arian out of Istanbul is with us as well, Palestinian academic and political activist. Bilal Abdul Karim, Syrian-based American journalist and Marshal Justice Dr. Nidal Sakr. To all of you, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome.
Walaikum assalam wa barakatuh.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, Jazakallah khairan so much for joining us. And Professor Sami Al-Arian, I'd like to actually start off with you because I saw quite an interesting comment and an interesting tweet from yourself where you speak about these genocides in Gaza and Lebanon against the strategic madness of the Zionist regime versus the strategic patience to strike back. Now, this comes against the background of what we see, what had happened last night. Iran obviously striking back, but again, looking at where we are at this point in time with this genocide, with this aggression of the Zionist regime, and as we head towards a year, the 1 year anniversary since October the 7th last year.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much for inviting me. What we've witnessed in the past year is a movement, a Zionist movement in action. It has exposed itself. Everyone knows that the Zionist movement is a settler colonial movement. They're trying to disguise themselves as trying to establish some sort of a national homeland for Jewish communities who have been persecuted in Europe. But the fact of the matter is that this is an expansionist, supremacist, racist movement that has actually upended what Judaism is about. And it has started its quest to take over the Palestinian land now for over 7 decades. What happened in the past year is that the Palestinians who have been trying to restore their rights, they have never stopped resisting. And the Israelis now think that they have the historic opportunity to finish the job that they thought or they think that they haven't been able to do since 1948. Now, Israel was facing three options. The first option was the so-called two-state solution, which was inaugurated even before Oslo, but it had some sort of a political dynamics since Oslo. That meant that the Palestinians, the official side of the Palestinians, the PLO, recognized the Jewish state on 78% of historical Palestine in return for a Palestinian state on 22%. That process was never really going to achieve anything. The number of settlers were about 115,000 at the time. Today, they're over 800,000. So that was dead in its tracks because of Israeli behavior and Israeli policy and Israeli plans to take over the whole land of Palestine from the river to the sea. The so-called one-state solution was never really a serious option for any Zionist to consider or even accept, because that means one man, one vote. That would basically negate what Zionism is all about. It's a supremacist ideology that thinks that the Jewish communities in Palestine, they have to be the dominant race, they have to be the dominant power in Palestine at the expense of Palestinians. And the third option was apartheid, that they were going to maintain the status quo, they're going to have all the land, and they're going to declare themselves as a Jewish state, democratic state, which means basically to negate Palestinians. But since apartheid is not very well accepted in today's world, they always had in the background the way to finish or to end the problem of the demographic presence of Palestinians in Palestine through ethnic cleansing and genocide. And that's what they have been pursuing since October the 7th. We've seen the destruction that has been wrought on Palestinians in Gaza. Tens of thousands of people have lost their lives. Millions have been displaced and dispossessed. Tens of thousands have been injured. The whole civic life in Gaza has been destroyed. Meanwhile, the whole world is just watching this, while some, like the United States, has been complicit and full partner of this genocide. Only few countries and few movements have stood up and saying that this is unacceptable, even though you have a General Assembly, a Security Council, International Court of Justice calling for the end of genocide and to stop this madness that the Israelis have been waging against basically defenseless Palestinians. What we've witnessed in the past months is that the movements such as Ansarullah in Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon and some others have been saying that they are going to also get engaged in this until this war in Gaza is shut down. Netanyahu doesn't like that. The Israelis don't like that. The Zionists have been celebrating and edging him and pushing him to finish, so-called to finish the job. And that's what happened when he threatened Lebanon and Iran and started his madness against them. He had some tactical successes, but he was delusional to think that this kind of behavior is going to stop these people who have said that this is a challenge and they will not stop attacking Israel until that Gaza war, until the genocide stops. And yesterday there was a response by Iran, and today there is a response by Hezbollah. And I think we are entering a phase of war of attrition that this will not stop. We have three possible scenarios very quickly. The scenario that Netanyahu and the Israelis get their way through the support of the West. They are able to pacify the resistance, eliminate the resistance in Gaza and Hezbollah. I think this is extremely unlikely. The other is that they will be defeated by not achieving their objectives. Their objectives is to eliminate the resistance, to free the hostages without paying any price for them, and to make sure that there will be no real access of resistance by attacking all sides in Yemen, in Iran, in Lebanon, and of course in Palestine. And I think this is also unlikely for them to achieve that. So the other side, the resistance, will win simply by denying them their victory. And then we're going to have, of course, a whole new Middle East.
Yes, Jazakallah shukran for that, Professor Sami. Just to bring Professor Nidal Sakr into the discussion. Professor Nidal, I think the last time when we had the discussion, it was the time of the martyrdom of Sheikh Ismail Haniya, rahimahumullah. And at that point in time, obviously the leadership of Hamas being targeted. We've seen since then the killing and the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah as well, and some of the other leaders as well. And just to look at it from your perspective as well, to look at the turn of events and how this is now likely to play out? Because again, as Professor Sami mentioned, that, and we're always saying that Gaza is going to be a barometer for resistance and struggle in terms of the Zionist entity not achieving its objectives. And you've held this view for a very, very long time by saying that Gaza will determine the new world order. Are we seeing these signs? Because we've seen how Hezbollah has responded. We've seen how Hamas has remained steadfast. We've seen now with Iran as well, and also what is coming out of Yemen. If you could just unmute your mic, please, Prof. Nidal.
I think it's muted on your end, brother. It's on your end. It's not my end. Muted by you. Brother, it's muted by you.
You can continue. I can hear you.
Yes. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you for being with you, brother. Good to see you, brother Sami. I haven't seen you for 20 years, actually, since last time. And good to see you, brother Bilal. I'd like always to put things in perspective. What we see today is we see a colonial imperialist project by the US. Israel is nothing but an attack dog. So to try to really blame Israel or to hold Israel as the main perpetrator and culprit and so forth, I think that does injustice. We have two projects right now. The project of freedom, which is led by Gaza, and we have the imperialist subjugation oppressive project of the US. And of course, just like I said, Israel is one of its attack dogs, but we have the whole colonial imperialist world of Europe that has a bloody history that's probably as bad as Americans. I don't know which one is worse on the other side. And now we're seeing like the free people of the world, whether in the West or anywhere else, or like lining up behind Gaza in this existential conflict that inshallah undoubtedly would lead to the victory of the freedom movement led by Gaza and Palestine. Hezbollah, the other axis of resistance, as well as the entire community of free people around the world, they all have taken side on this, and they have all given victory to the side of Palestinians that have been subjugated for over 100 years as we speak right now. Hezbollah is one of the fronts. We have other fronts, of course, Houthi and other and so forth, but we also have the streets. We have the American university campuses, the European university campuses are all citing. So resistance today takes place all over the world in different forms and means and ways to express that. And just like I said, Hamas or Gaza in particular, or As-Sinwar, who's actually the leader of the Palestinian freedom and the free world as we speak, is the one who's calling the shot on who's going to be the president. We've seen the outcome in British election, French election, so forth. And in about a month or so, we will see that leader actually calling the shots on who's going to be the result, or I don't know if there's such thing as a winner of the upcoming American election. Brother, I don't see myself on the thing. Can you just confirm that you can hear me? Okay.
Yes,
can you hear me? Okay, so basically what we see right now, we see another episode of the conflict here. It's an eternal conflict between good and evil. Bush was lied about everything except for one thing. He said this is a war between good and evil, and God is not neutral between them. We see that all clearly. Hezbollah is doing their part. There's no doubt in my mind that Hezbollah will come out, inshallah, victorious. We see the news every single day about the ground invasion, the combats that happened between Israeli occupiers or Zionist occupiers against Lebanon. We have seen whether with the Iranian strike, with Hezbollah strikes, with Houthi strikes, with Palestinian strikes, with even Iraqi strikes, they've been playing by the terms of war that are compatible with civility, civilization, and the Islamic principles of not targeting, non-combatants. We've seen the complete opposite on the side of the Americans. I won't say Israelis, because if the airplanes that are killing people in Lebanon, in Palestine, everywhere else, Yemen, and so forth, are F-35s with MK-84s, 83, whatever that thing is, doesn't matter who's behind the wheel. And quite often, actually, behind the wheel is American troops. We've seen the first foot on the ground with the Gaza invasion. It was actually Delta Force, and it was like the Navy SEALs. So it really doesn't matter. And when you have, like right now, so many American troops stationed around the Middle East and inside occupation, the Zionist occupation, we really can no longer distinguish on who's quote unquote Israeli, who's American. To me, they're all one and same. So let's just draw the lines very clearly. We have a US war on the world and on freedom, or on the free world, and we have Palestine and its supporters or its allies on the other side. And definitely the world community of free people and people who stand with justice definitely will prevail. There is no question about it. How long does it take? In my opinion, inshallah, it's not going to be more than a year or two. I've been calling on people to book their trips to for Ramadan 2028, inshallah, in free Palestine. I have no doubt in my mind that this is, inshallah, what's going to happen, and I'm not changing my mind about the date of this was going to happen, inshallah.
Jazakallah khairan so much for that, Dr. Nidal. Brother Bilal, just to continue with you, and I think we knew from the beginning when this aggression had started against the people of Palestine, when the genocide had begun, that people like Benjamin Netanyahu, the Zionist regime, is going to go rogue. They're going to cross, there are no lines, they will cross every line, every red line they will be crossing. And this is the reason why when Professor Sami tweeted and he spoke about the strategic madness of the Zionist regime. And just looking at it from a resistance perspective, until now, the resistance have been fairly patient. And it's now come to a situation where we see Iran hitting back. We've seen Hezbollah, as we mentioned, as well. And also, when one looks at it in Gaza itself, it hasn't been easy for the Zionist entity in Gaza in itself, although they claim to have possibly destroyed the mortar and the bricks. But at the end of the day, in terms of killing or even impacting on the resistance in any way whatsoever, I mean, there are question marks, there are huge question marks, whether they have succeeded or they have not.
Well, of course, there are a lot of question marks, maybe more question marks than you mentioned, particularly being here in northern Syria. We have extensive experience with the group Hezbollah and the Iranians. First of all, if we could talk about the resistance that the Iranians are putting forward. While not being nostalgic, I have to be a realist. I'm a journalist. I have to tell you what I see on the ground, and then people can make their own determinations. Back in April, when the Iranians decided to respond to the Zionist aggression, they launched 300 drones and missiles and pointed it towards Israel. This is something that was known while the drones were still in the air and on the way. They took to Twitter to basically say that they had responded to Israeli aggression. Well, those rockets and drones, they landed, and there were no casualties on the Israeli side. If we look at what took place yesterday, according to the Israelis, it was 180 missiles or projectiles that were sent in their direction as well. So now that totals 380 projectiles which were sent from Iran. We haven't got a single casualty from the Israeli side. I have my doubts about the sincerity of the resistance that Iran is putting forward. Iran does not have a history of serious resistance against the Israelis. They don't. Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Tehran. There are a lot of question marks in that regard, but we'll have to just put that to the side. Once again, I know that might not be popular with a lot of people, But everybody wants to believe that the resistance is all in. But what we're seeing on the ground, if you throw, 480 punches and you don't land one, you're gonna have to start thinking about, is this either a paper tiger, or are they perhaps, do they have another agenda? Now, when we're talking about the group known as Hezbollah, again, here in northern Syria, we have lots of experience with them. They supported Bashar al-Assad in their genocide, and so therefore we have experience with them. I do believe that they are serious about fighting against the Zionist entity. I think that they have the means to do that. They are a group that fights with vigor and spirit. They are. Just because I see that they've allied with some of the wrong people and they were on the wrong side of history. I'm not going to take anything away from their fighting prowess, and I do think that they will be effective fighters on the ground. I don't think that the Israelis are really ready to get into a dogfight with Hezbollah. I don't see that. A lot of them are weakened warriors, and a war of attrition is certainly not what the Israelis are up for, because their history in wars of attrition, when they occupied Lebanon going back into the 1980s, they occupied Gaza, and where they ended their occupation in the early 2000s and all, there was no benefit in it for them. And they just depleted their resources and their manpower, and they basically got nothing for it. So, no, they're not going to be up for a war of attrition. But I will say to everybody that the person that, once again, Hezbollah, I believe, is going to be a very effective fighting force on the ground. But I don't have a lot of trust for Iran or their effectiveness.
You can pause there, Brother Bilal. Professor Sami, just to follow up from what Brother Bilal is saying, and there has been a mixed reaction to Iran, to the projectiles, to the missiles that were sent to Israel. There are many that have applauded, but there are others who are obviously skeptical and raising the question, what did Iran actually achieve by bombing and by sending these missiles into Israel?
Well, I mean, it is very obvious that the Zionists are not happy about what Iran did. Those who are trying to say otherwise, either they're not aware of the situation or they're trying just to belittle it because they have a different understanding of Iran, or they have a bone of contention with it because of what happened in Syria. It's very easy to know whether this was effective or not effective by looking at how the enemy is perceiving it, not necessarily what others are perceiving it. Iran had to respond because it is the anchor of the so-called axis of resistance. If it didn't respond, then the whole notion of having an axis of resistance would be totally undermined, and that will even open the appetite of Israel, not only to hit the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank and Hezbollah in Lebanon, but also they would be next. So even if we are going to cast suspicion on their intention, it is in their self-preservation to respond. Otherwise, they would be hit next. So just from the mere survival instinct, they had to respond because of what happened not only to Ismail Haniyeh, but also to the resistance to their partners or to their axis in Palestine and Lebanon. Also, we need to look at what the Palestinians are saying, what the Palestinian resistance movements are saying. They said if it wasn't for Iran, they could not have been as powerful or as able to resist the occupation and actually to mount the fierce resistance in the battlefield. There is consensus on this. No one can argue the role of Iran in this. We've seen Iran, for example, aiding them not only financially, but also in terms of strategic aid, in terms of arms, plans, all kinds of things, not only this year or last year, but throughout the struggle for dozens and even decades. So for someone to come and try to cast doubt on this. Either they are misinformed or they have an agenda in which I understand, because what happened in Syria, obviously people have been impacted, and therefore it is in their interest to cast them as either paper tiger or whatever they want to call them. It is no doubt that Israel has been hit hard, but it has been hit hard to the point where there will not be a regional war. We have to understand that this particular strike has been calculated that it will send a signal that Iran is capable of damaging and hurting Israeli interests. They only targeted military and security targets in terms of buildings, military bases, and so on and so forth. But they're trying to avoid civilian casualties. At the same time, they're trying to avoid having a regional war. Now, whether they are successful or not, that remains to be seen. And certainly they have sent this message over and over again, but they cannot afford not to do it. Israel, for the past 2 weeks, was trying to restore its image, was trying to restore this notion that it has an army that is invincible. It is what they have lost on October the 7th. The self-respect and the respect of its people to the army, they were hit hard on October the 7th. And that's why we've seen all these genocidal war taking place, because they're trying to restore this image that they lost. And they thought that what they did also in the past 2 weeks in Lebanon, particularly in Lebanon, against Hezbollah, was part of this restoration of its image, of its image of being invincible and capable, and to restore also this thing about the security failures that they suffered on October the 7th, but now they are able to go and kill thousands of people through these tactics. But what happened today and what happened yesterday was they brought them back to the notion that there is no deterrence for Israel. Israel depends on its deterrence on 6 principles. All of them were undermined on October the 7th. They were trying to restore that, but yet Iran is playing a role in trying to also undermine these 6 principles. They are very quickly, namely preemptive strikes, early warning systems, effective deterrence, strong defense, quick resolution, and escalation dominance. That's what we've been seeing in the past few days. Until yesterday was escalation dominance. Whenever they try to do, they escalate more and more and more. If you go and analyze each one of these, you would find that the axis of resistance has played a great role to undermine each and every one of them, starting from October 7th and further down. And what the United States and other Western powers are trying to help Israelis to overcome this. So that's when Iran hit back in April with drones and few missiles. Israel needed the help of America, France, Britain, even some Arab countries, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and so on and so forth, because it could not mount a defense, even though these weapons were some of them were not very advanced. These were really primitive in terms of the missile technology, yet it needed the support of all these countries, which undermined this thing about strong defense. Israel is incapable of defending itself on its own. And yesterday was another demonstration of this. When you hit it with over 200 missiles and rockets, and you only, at best, according to them, I mean, Iranians say 90% effectiveness, but let's take what the Israelis say, 80 or 85 got in. That's almost 35% success. That's huge. And that's going to certainly not only send a signal, but it's going to alter the power structure. So for us to look at this as being simply a theater or something that not very effective, I think is short-sighted.
Yes, we'll bring Professor Nidal back in. Professor Nidal, my question is, what does it actually mean to support the resistance or the failure to support the resistance? And particularly looking at where the support is coming. And we know that there is some history in the Middle East in particular. Brother Bilal spoke about Hezbollah and supporting the Assad regime. We know Iran and Iraq have been in war as well. The Saudi Arabia, what has taken place in Yemen, the spat between Saudi Arabia and Iran as well. And at a time like this, and to understand what it really means to support the Palestinian cause, to support the people of Gaza, because at the end of the day, it's a year. It's going to be 365 days of a genocide that is unfolding, and just focusing on some of the history, yeah, and particularly when one looks at all these countries, there is some history at the end of the day where we've seen that these countries obviously have been either at war with each other, or they've been involved in a lot over the years. But again, the key focus area has to be supporting the resistance. And are we losing sight of this by focusing on our internal differences and what has happened in the past?
That's a very good question, Brother Inayat. You know that I've been on the ground with the Egyptian revolution, and we know that President Mohammed Morsi paid the ultimate price for his position, Labbaiki ya Suriya, when he gave support to the Syrian revolution. I've also been in Hafd al-Assad jail camps back in '83. When it comes to the blood of our Syrian brothers, of course, that's something that's dear to us, and all the blood of Muslims is sacred. The crimes committed by them, by whether the Syrians, their supporters, pro-Iran groups, or including Hezbollah, these are crimes that we can never overlook. However, what we have right now is we have a war between the axis of resistance, and we have on the other side the axis of evil. And we have to remember that the crimes committed against our brothers in Syria were not only by pro-Iranian groups. You know that ISIS is American creation that was mostly funded by Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. They connected crimes that are no less gruesome than the ones committed by pro-Iranian groups and so forth. And when we see that axis playing out in the media, we see that all the pro-Saudi, pro-Iranian, pro-Emiratis groups who actually are responsible for the bloodshed that we have in Sudan today, the bloodshed that we had in Egypt, the bloodshed that we have in Libya, and all over the place is committed by those people. So this is all the axis of Zionism. Those are the ones who are playing through the media, through every way, trying to create division or sow division among the Muslims right now. Remember, just I was in Rabaa, where 10,000 Muslims were killed, 10,000 Egyptians, Christians, and Muslims were exterminated within one day, something that no other place or no other criminal in history has committed in one day. Nonetheless, that if we see a war by Israel right now against Egypt, or if we see an attack of Israelis against Egyptian military, there is no question about that. All Muslims should side in defense of Egypt against the one enemy that we all have in common. Yes, the crimes committed against our brothers in Syria, we can never overlook. But nonetheless, at this point in time, we have existential conflict. We have a war that's decisive between the axis of colonialism, the Zionist axis, led by the US, Israel, Europeans, Arab dictators on one hand, and we have the resistance movements on the other hand, led by Palestine, Gaza, West Bank, Palestine in general. And now we have, alhamdulillah, the support of that axis in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Yemen, and in Iran, and in the free people all over the world with their protests, with their encampments, with everything. So the lines are drawn very clearly. There is no point there is no room at this point to try to bring to solve any division and to bring out all of these arguments that are right now secondary when we have this conflict with or war where the lines are drawn. If you see right now, the ones who are showing on Arabia and other Zionist Arab Zionist channels, from Shi'is, from Lebanese, from and so forth. Most of the Lebanese, most of the Syrians, by the way, that I have seen sowing division and trying to celebrate the martyrdom of Hassan Nasrallah and so forth, actually people who are living in Saudi Arabia and in UAE, fulfilling and serving the agenda of those Zionist Arab dictators. So let's put all of this aside. Right now, we have the lines of the war of conflict are clearly drawn between Palestine, which is the main issue of Muslims, and the free world on one hand, and we have the Zionists, whether it's the US, Israel, Zionist Arab dictator, and so forth on the other hand, and there is no gray area between them. So, anybody at this point, in my opinion, who tries to sow division or doubts, discrediting resistance, discrediting anybody who's fighting on the side of Palestine, to me, is somebody that I question their intentions and motives.
Yes, Professor Nidal. Sheikh Bilal, we are at a very, very tipping point right now. And as a Muslim Ummah, the general mobilization of Muslims is obligatory and obviously according to their ability in supporting the resistance. Because what we are seeing from the Zionist entities, we're seeing this expansion of the battlefield, and this is an enemy that is not going to retreat, and they're not going to be stopping their aggression. In fact, what we've seen, what has happened now with Lebanon, leading to an escalation, expanding the battlefield, for want of a better term. And what is critical is how do we as an Ummah respond, number one, but also those that are very, very close to the action, particularly those that have already reacted, and also taking a look at some of the others. We've seen the closing of borders, we've seen crossings, and this is seen as a betrayal of the Palestinian cause. It's seen as a betrayal of the resistance, because we've seen many of these surrounding countries at the end of the day not mobilizing, and more importantly, not even providing any relief for those who are in need.
And but firstly, I would like to maybe clarify
Unmute
something.
your mic. There we go.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes, can you hear me? Okay. Brother Nidal, he made an important point. He said that all Muslims should side against the enemy. All Muslims, and he used the word should. We all agree. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. All of the Muslims have to come together against the enemy. I am very much for that. But also at the same time, it would be grossly irresponsible. Hear what I'm going to say? It would be grossly irresponsible to ignore the Iranian role in the deaths of 1 million Syrians. I'm going to say that again. To all of a sudden just pretend that that didn't happen, and it was just some misunderstanding somehow, that 1 million Syrians were killed and half the population displaced, and now we're going to say that, okay, well, we're going to put all of that aside. That's hard to put aside, because what was behind the deaths of 1 million people, this is not 10 or 15 people. So I would love to be wrong. I'm going to tell you up front. I would love to be wrong about Iran. That would make me happy. I don't take any pleasure in seeing 480 projectiles being thrown at the Israelis and no deaths have occurred. That doesn't make me happy. But me as a journalist, and I have to say what's on the ground. We've got to say what's really happening here. And what we're seeing on the ground up until now has not been an effective Iran. That's just the reality of the situation. After your embassy has been bombed, after your leaders have been killed, and their proxy leaders have been killed, And I understand that we are in a phase where we're saying now, all right, well, we're sending you a message. But the Israelis have sent multiple messages. And once again, I'm ready to be wrong, Nidal. And Professor Sami, I'm ready to be wrong. I want to be wrong. I really do. I'd like to take you guys' telephone numbers so that I can tell you I was wrong. But until I see that there's actually something on the ground tangible, it's going to be hard for me to see that the entities that teamed up with Bashar al-Assad to kill 1 million Syrians all of a sudden now is really serious about saving Sunni Muslims. So that part I did want to say. And just to finalize it, yes, we've got to come together, guys. We've got to. The Egyptians have spent big amounts of money to build walls and such like that. They've offered no assistance whatsoever except to keep the Palestinians out. I get the logic that they're saying, which is that we don't want them to be displaced so that their land can be stolen, but we don't want them to be killed either. Abdul Fattah Sisi had more than ample opportunity to say to Netanyahu, look, we've got these aid trucks that are here in Egypt. They're coming in to Rafah, and we're going to send tanks in front of them and behind them. If you choose to attack them, then that's up to you. He had plenty of opportunity to do that, and he didn't do it. The only time we saw the mobilization of the Jordanians was to help to shoot down missiles that were going over their airspace. The Saudis are just waiting for all of this to end so that they can go back to the agreement that they were trying to make with the Americans and the Israelis. They wanted a NATO-style agreement wherein they would recognize Israel's right to exist, meaning that the lands which they stole from the Palestinians is recognized by Saudi Arabia as their land, something they have no business doing. But they want an agreement from the Americans that should they ever be attacked, i.e. from Iran or other than them, that the Americans would come to their aid. Good luck with that. But the point of the matter is that you're right. So many of the Muslim countries have abandoned the Palestinian cause. If you go over to the Emiratis are also, they're the first country that opened up, I believe, the Israeli embassy and are very, very willing to normalize with them. The Bahrainis, if you look at this, and this is an important point here, if you look at the Bahrainis, the Saudis, and the Emiratis, the Houthis were working hard to create a virtual blockade of the Red Sea because half of the foodstuffs that go to, that the Israelis consume are imported. So they put together a good blockade and a good effort to support the Palestinian brothers and sisters. But what did the Emiratis and the Bahrainis do? They opened up a land corridor so that those ships could dock in Bahrain and Emirates, and they could go by land through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, on to Haifa, so that business can continue as usual, so that they could circumvent the Houthi blockade. So yeah, it's a bit of a mess. We want to see a lot more from our governments, but so far we haven't seen it. And I am hoping and praying that a mass mobilization of the Muslims can either send a message to the leaders. You either get to work or get out.
Professor Sami, just looking at resistance and not only Iran, but any form and all forms of resistance at this point in time against this Zionist aggression, what would make it most effective?
Well, I think we need first to agree on our strategic goal. And then after we agree on what the strategic goal is, we can talk about what forms of resistance need to be implemented and used in order to fulfill this strategic objective. I believe our strategic objective should be to dismantle the Zionist structure, to dismantle an ideology that is based on racism, supremacism, expansionism, and so on and so forth. It's trying to replace people with other communities. And if our objective, if our grand strategy is to dismantle the Zionist structures in Palestine, then we need to identify its sources of power, of influence. It's the imperatives that makes it survive and expand and exist. And I have a study, I don't have time to go over it now, in which I identify 12 imperatives, 12 pillars. You can think of it as a house, the Zionist regime as a house that is built on 12 pillars, 12 columns, 12 imperatives. Each one of them gives it some kind of a staying power. Once we identify them, we will be able to know how it could be dismantled. You would find out that the Palestinians on their own cannot dismantle the Zionist entity, the Zionist project, the Zionist enterprise, the Zionist regime. It needs the efforts of the whole Ummah. The formula is very simple. The Zionist regime cannot be dismantled without the Palestinians, and it can't be dismantled with the Palestinians alone. Once we identify this, and we're able to build a global movement in order to undermine these supremacist, racist, expansionist, aggressive structure, then we'll be able to achieve our goal. Now, in terms of resistance, discounting military, because that's not what I do, and that's not what the overwhelming majority of people do, we need to focus on all forms of resistance, politically, diplomatically, economically, commercially, culturally, academically, in the media, in the legal circles, educationally, even sports, entertainment. Every aspect of resistance must be employed. And it has to be, and our goal here is to impact the Zionist influence, weaken Zionist, or even eradicate it, eliminate it completely in the societies. In other words, we will have two main tasks. The first task is to support the steadfastness and resilience of the Palestinian people so that they stay on their land. Because if they leave, there is no cause, or at least it would be delayed for a long time. So they need to stay. And secondly, to engage the Zionist structures, the Zionist movement, the Zionist ideology, the Zionist friends. You need also to define what Zionism is and what a Zionist is. A Zionist is any person who believes, acknowledges, or accepts the fact that Israel has a sovereign right in Palestine, any part of Palestine. Anybody who believes in this is a Zionist. That could be a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or even atheist or anyone else. And therefore, all those who support Zionism have put themselves in that camp, and they need to be engaged, either that they can understand the nature of Zionism and change their attitude and their behavior, or they would have to be engaged in a way that they should not be supporting this Zionist entity, this Zionist regime. And that's basically what I'm talking about here. The Palestinians have been resisting for over a century, but they can only impact this and take it so far. They can keep the struggle alive. They can certainly impact the spread of the Zionist, of this cancer throughout the region. But on their own, they can't do it. Because again, if you look and study these 12 imperatives, you will find that Palestinians may impact 3 or 4 of them, but the overwhelming majority of them, we really have to build this global movement. And everybody is like having a hammer. And then you're chipping away from every column, bit by bit, until it collapses. And it will be replaced by a regime that can truly call for justice, call for self-determination, for independence, for the restoration of rights. I want to just point out that the origin of the problem here is that we had 2 forms or 2 experiences of Jewish communities. The Jews who lived in Europe were persecuted, were basically oppressed by the European societies, European communities But those who lived under Islam, that's why the Jewish Encyclopedia calls it the golden age of Jews. Those who lived under Islamic communities and societies, they did not suffer the same thing. And the Europeans, the imperialists, wanted to solve two problems in one go. They wanted to solve what they called their Jewish problem, which is what they thought were excess of Jews that they hated. That's where anti-Semitism comes from. It was not experienced for the most part in Muslim societies. In fact, in 1492, when Jews and Muslims were kicked out of Islamic Spain, Andalusia, most of them came into the Muslim countries all the way from Morocco until probably Indonesia and beyond. So what we have here is an imperialist structure that came with the advent of Westphalia and others, and that they said, we're going to create a Jewish state in the midst of the Muslim world. We'll solve this Jewish problem. At the same time, they will solve the Eastern problem, because every time they try to divide this area, conquer this area, invade this area, occupy this area, Muslims quickly regroup and repel them back. And so they wanted to bring and create an Israel in the midst of the Muslim world in order to keep this. And that's what needs to be focused on. I do not discount the suffering of other Muslims. In fact, before Tufan al-Aqsa, I used to say the centrality of the Palestinian issue has nothing to do with the suffering of the Palestinian people. I say the Syrians, the Afghans, the Iraqis, the Sudanese, the Somalis, the Libyans, the Yemenis, and so on and so forth. All of them suffered at one point even more than the Palestinians. But the centrality of the Palestinian struggle comes from the nature of the enemy. That's what makes it. It doesn't even come because of sacred places and sacred land and land of prophets and all that. It really comes from that. Once we understand the nature of this struggle, the nature of the enemy, there is no other enemy that can be equated. That doesn't lessen the suffering of other people and say, hey, are you telling me that the Palestinian blood is more precious than the Syrian blood? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the nature of this enemy wants to keep this ummah divided, fragmented, under control, with the hegemonic power. It will never regroup, it will never unite, it will never have any kind of civilization, of advanced, even economic prosperity, and so on and so forth. Because that's the only way they can keep being in control of this region, of this ummah, is by making sure that everybody is down. And that's why we need to address it. So, and the problem now, when you have two things going on at the same time, one is probably getting you into fulfilling a goal, which is you needed people to be independent, to be free, and so on and so forth, living maybe under a democratic system. But at the same time, if that goal is going to undermine our struggle in Palestine, we need to rethink that. That's what is at stake. It has nothing to do with the aspiration of certain people or others. Not all struggles are the same, because we have to understand the nature of what we're dealing with here. There is a grand strategy. That grand strategy is we need to confront the Zionist regime, the Zionist entity, the Zionist structures. Every other struggle should come under that. Now, if you have two struggles, in one is trying to achieve something, but by going there, you're undermining this, that needs to be rethought. That's what many people have not been able to grasp or understand or discount. And I'm not in a position, certainly, to argue, what people think, but that's what I think we need to clearly and we need to seriously consider. Because if this thesis is correct, then every time you're doing something, you will never be able to achieve your real objectives, because the Zionists are powerful enough to undermine you. And if anybody had a doubt, just look at the so-called Arab Spring. All these governments that came because of the uprisings of Arabs in 2011 through 2013, they see that the Zionists played a huge role in undermining each and every one of them, which means that we're not allowed, our region is not allowed to democratize, is not allowed to unite, is not allowed to prosper, is not allowed to start its own civilizational model. It's not allowed to do any of that. And therefore, our collective efforts need to go and be focused on how we can dismantle this. I think most people, most Islamic movements have got it backwards. Many people, when I was growing up, they think, okay, we're going to establish our own Islamic model, and we're going to do this and do that, and eventually we're going to have our own army, and then we'll confront the Zionists. It's the wrong approach. It should be totally the opposite. You go and dismantle this, confront this, engage this. I don't have the time to go through details, but that's the idea. Then after they are dismantled, after the imperialist influence is weakened, if not totally eradicated, then we will be independent. We will be free enough to start our own quest towards building our civilization. It may take 100 years, but at least you will be free, you will be independent, you will be sovereign to try it. And you're going to make a lot of mistakes, but you will have that ability to try to develop your own civilizational model. But that will start from confronting this menace, from confronting the cancer that has been spreading, this power that has been imposed on us. I mean, I don't have to remind you, during this Tufan al-Aqsa, 57 Muslim countries meet in November, almost 5 weeks after it started. And when you combine them, over 5 million soldiers, tens of thousands of planes and tanks and so on and so forth of arms, none of them are able to advance a single thing, with the exception, of course, of the few movements and countries that we are seeing today through the axis of resistance. But mostly everybody is impotent. They took one decision. That decision was that we're not going to allow the Palestinians to starve. We're going to provide aid. Yet, not a single country, 57 countries, was able to bring in one bottle of water to a Palestinian child unless Netanyahu said so. What does that tell you about the status of the Ummah? This is the situation that we're confronting. So now to go and focus on other conflicts and try to weaken the central struggle of this Ummah, I think it's going to take us into some dangerous territory, but does not, again, discount any struggle, but we have to put it in perspective and we have to get our priorities right.
Shukran for that, Prophet Sami. Prophet Nidal, I know Dr. Sami spoke about a global movement, which is one thing that you've been pushing for a very, very long time. And also earlier on, you confident that this Zionist project is actually starting to see its end times, and it is going to come to an end. And you mentioned next year Ramadan, inshallah, we will be in Masjid al-Aqsa. And just to expand a bit on that in terms of the optimism and how you see this Zionist project obviously failing and coming to an end.
Yes, brother. I mean, I always speak that happiness is clarity of thoughts. So I think the more clarity we have on any situation, that will help us see through clearly in terms of what is to come. I just want to touch on a point that Brother Bilal said. A single blood of our brothers in Syria is something that we can never overcome. As I stated, all the blood of humanity and Muslims is sacred, and we will answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. But you have to remember, brother, that what happened in Syria is no more than what we see in Sudan right now in terms of the crimes committed against our people in Sudan. It's no less, it's no more than what happened to our brothers in Iraq. And this is all by Zionist Arab plotting, funding, you name it. Those of us who live in that region for a long time, we can testify to all the massacres committed against Muslims and shedding the blood of Muslims right and left in almost every single country. And you know what Iran did to Syria is as bad as it is. It's by no means less than what Arab dictators, Zionist Arab dictators, have done to people. I touch on the point that Brother Sami said. When we look about Zionism, when we talk about Zionism, we're talking about a project. We're not talking about a country. We're not talking about a group. We're not talking about a religion. We're talking about a project. And that project is a cancer, is the largest threat to the human community, to humanity, to the world community everywhere. And Zionism, simply, if you put it in brief, it's basically every L every crime, every atrocity that we have ever witnessed throughout human history, put it all together, put apartheid, put ethnic cleansing, put erosion of family, putting exploitation, manipulation, imperialism, colonialism, put it all together and multiply it by 1,000 times, and that's still like not as evil as what Zionism is. Alhamdulillah, I mean, we have a great awakening around the world in terms of the threat and the danger of Zionism to humanity. We have, there is actually much more anti-Zionist Jews today around the world in the US and elsewhere than Zionist Jews. We have seen, alhamdulillah, I mean, most of the movements that we have seen in the US these days, not in our name, and we appeared on this show with many anti-Zionist Jews that they are at the forefront of fighting for the cause of freedom, represented now by Palestine as the spearhead to it, by no means representing only Palestine, representing all the human struggles for freedom and equality and justice around the world. So there is actually much more Zionist in the US right now than in occupied Palestine. Let's just be mindful of this. Zionists or Christian Zionists in the US are probably some of the worst factions of Zionists anywhere. And without them and without their support, probably like Netanyahu and his gang will be like, in The Hague and some other places. So basically, like, it takes us back to the point one, which I've always stated throughout the years. I've been appearing on your shows for at least 20, 30 years. From day one, I said that Zionism is the largest threat to humanity. The US is the main criminal. The US is basically the one that harbors terrorism, harbors Zionism, gives it the bloodline, gives it the arms, and so forth. The US, by siding blindly with all its resources, with all its weapons behind this Zionism, is going to go down. I'm here in California. I'm not speaking from some shelter or bunker or whatever. I'm right here, like in the lion's den, and I can tell you that the US is the first one that's going to go down and pay the price for its evil support and being the primary responsible for Zionism and its crimes. Zionism is the largest threat to humanity and the world community everywhere. And until we get rid of Zionism in every means, ways that we have at our disposal from anywhere and everywhere that we can do that, it's our top priority. I think we are waking up to this. I think this upcoming election next month in the US, I can say with full confidence, is going to be the last time we have election when Israel is around. Israel is losing cause. As Israel, as the spearhead of Zionism, by the way, is a losing cause. There's no question about it. As I said, I go back to what Bush said. Bush right now he's the laughing stock to the whole world, but he said one thing true, and he said that this is a war between good and evil, and Allah is not neutral between them. I would say, like for everybody that really lacks any clarity of where this is ending, I would say it again. Book your trip, inshallah, to Free Palestine, to Al-Aqsa for Ramadan 2028. Inshallah, we'll see you there if Allah gives us, more time to live.
Yes, Jazakallah for that. Brother Bilal, I know we are coming to an end, and I will go around possibly just give each panelist a minute or two to round up. But just looking at where we are at this point in time, and for us to remain loyal to the Palestinian cause, loyal to the Palestinian resistance, and to oppose those who are opposing the Palestinians at this point in time, what do we as a Muslim Ummah need to do?
Okay, well, if we're going to be talking about people who are living in a Muslim country, they have to mobilize to pressure their leaders. They have to pressure them and make them feel that their positions as the leaders of those countries is not secure as long as they're going to remain passive of this situation which is taking place in Palestine. For example, Egypt. The Egyptian people, they've got to protest. They've got to make it clear that the armed services are at the disposal of the people and not of the upper echelon. In the Arab world, as you guys I'm sure know, it's just the opposite. The armed services are at the beck and call of the leadership, not the people. So if you're living in a Muslim country, I say that that's one of the things that you can do. If you're living in a non-Muslim country, for example, South Africa or another country like that, what you can do, you can also pressure your leaders and make things difficult for them. Why are we supporting, if that country that you're in is supporting Israel, like, for example, the United Kingdom and their prime minister just yesterday saying we stand with Israel. Okay, stand with them in what? What have they been doing? They've been committing a genocide. We've got to keep that pressure up. We can't let the pressure kind of dissipate and say, oh, well, nobody's listening to us. So that's what I see has to be done. We've got to keep people on social media, even though that it's heavily monitored and censored, but some of the message is still getting through. So instead of there being 3 messages being sent in support of the brothers and sisters in Palestine and in Lebanon, send 30, send it 300, let it be 3,000. Everybody can do something. So there should be nobody people can organize in their communities. Okay, what are we going to do to pressure our local MP or our local representative? All of these things are all a help. Every little bit counts. And I think that that's what we need to be pursuing. And I think as an ummah, we can get this thing done. I really believe that. I share no less the optimism of our brother Nidal and Professor Sami. We may differ exactly how we're going to get there, but I believe that, what you say, 2028? Let's call it 2027.
Yes, Jazakallah for that. Okay, we've come to the end of the broadcast, and we're just going to go around very, very quickly, starting with you, Professor Sami. Just some closing comments, and then to you, Professor Nidal and Brother Bilal Karim.
On mute. Well, I wouldn't give it a particular date. I think it's all about the engagement and how much efforts we put in. We learned from our dean that this is about as much faith as also the balance of power. The Quran tells us, وَعِدُّ لَهُمْ مَسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ, and then he gives us the example in Badr, where the difference in the balance of power, Allah says it could be with huge community that is faithful 1 to 10, but also they have weakness 1 to 2. So we can't put a particular date. What we have to do is to identify the tasks, to identify what we need to do. And as I said earlier today, what we need to do is to identify the points where the objective is to dismantle the Zionist structures. We need to know their sources of power, the imperatives that they use in order to maintain and sustain their influence and their power throughout the world. Once we identify them, we'll find that every person on earth who has a conscience would have a role to play. So if we do not start doing this, it could be 4028 before anything happens. If we start doing something about it, then the balance of power would be reduced slowly, gradually, but eventually this structure would collapse because all these efforts collectively are going to have an impact. I say that we started certainly, and we saw the efforts and the consequences of what some people have done, but still we are still a long way to go. We need to engage, as I said earlier, in every facet, in every field. Politically, we need to get engaged. So it's not just about BDS or about economic boycott or this and that. We need a more comprehensive, strategic plan to go and try to impact them in every single country, in every field. To fund Al-Aqsa has helped us a lot to bring this closer. We could never have spent any amount of funds or money in order to go and get millions of people in the streets. This only came because people now have known more about the Zionist ideology, and the Zionist behavior has been exposed. So we were able to get Palestine today is becoming the symbol, the key, the scale, the ruler, the compass of every single issue in the world. There is no other issue, there is no other struggle that can bring millions of people in the streets in every capital of the world. There is no other, you can go and look. There is nothing else that can bring that many people. That means Palestine could actually unite the efforts in order to fight and struggle against racism, against exploitation, against imperialism, against occupation, against oppression, injustice, you name it. We can actually change this oppressive international system to make it more just and more equal if we focus our efforts in a way that it could actually undermine these things. So this is, I'm very hopeful, of course, and I think we have been promised this, but it's not going to come by wishing it. It has to come through collective efforts, sustained efforts, planned efforts, and trying to be as comprehensive as possible and to prioritize the struggles rather than to use a notion of reductionist thinking. But I am very hopeful, inshallah, that we are on the right path to fund Al-Aqsa is giving us this needed momentum to start a global movement to achieve just that.
Inshallah, I mean, Professor Sami, thank you for that. Professor Nidal, just some final thoughts.
Yes, brother. Alhamdulillah, I mean, for my entire life, I've been a grassroots activist on the ground, has been also like try to be strategic as much as possible. Remember, like when the Al-Aqsa flood first took place, I was one of the first ones to come try to call for some sort of strategy and networks and do all kinds of things. And alhamdulillah, we got involved in all the efforts with the ICC, ICJ, and so forth from very, very early on, only to realize very soon that actually, alhamdulillah, I mean, that this thought of Al-Aqsa is made under the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and is guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have seen what has been taking place around the world on the grassroots level is much more than we could ever predict. I would say that in about a month from now, we're going to have the most historic presidential election here in the US. The US, as we know, is basically the spearhead or the main culprit in this Zionist project. Israel is nothing but a watchdog. Once the US takes its hands off supporting Israel, Israel will just vanish. There's going to be a major turmoil in the US a month from today, and it's going to last for a long time to come. Americans are fed up with the Zionist manipulation and control of America. For the very first time, very major groups among the Muslim Task Force for Election have done what they should have done in 2000. In 2000, unfortunately, some misguided Muslims went to support Bush, which at the time when most or many, a good part of Muslims wanted to support Ralph Nader at the time, the Green Party, quote unquote, disruptor, which we needed at the time. Well, this time we're not making this mistake anymore. Alhamdulillah, the majority of Muslim groups right now, or at least the most influential one, has called to vote for the Green Party. Jill Stein, which is Jewish, by the way, but she's probably the only one that speaks my language as eloquently as you can see. This is going to create a very major disruption in the US. Why? Because it's going to pinpoint Zionists against non-Zionists. There is the lines between the Republicans and Democrats in terms of who's more Zionist actually are very blurred. They all just as evil. They actually try to even outperform each other in terms of their Zionist support and allegiance. I expect that Zionist candidates, mostly Harris, is going to lose this election because of that. But the weight of the Muslims and pro-justice and freedom votes in America and how much leverage it carries, how much weight it carries, is going to go unnoticed, and is going to force everybody to recalculate their position and so forth. If the US is in this array, it's to everybody's interest. And I think the US is going to be in this area for the next 4 years. I think the whole political alignments and allegiances and political map in the US is going to be redrawn. And I think that by itself, inshallah, is going to give us the chance to see a world that's gearing more towards freedom, towards justice, less evil American imperialist Zionist agenda. And I can agree with Brother Bilal that the date most likely is going to be 27, but I like to be cautious, so that's why I said 2028. But I have no doubt in my mind, if I am to live until next election, there's going to be an election without Israel on the map, inshallah.
If I may, brother, before you end, I was leading this misguided effort in 2000.
That's what I meant. That's exactly what I was alluding to.
So,
yes.
Okay. I mean, you made a dig, but this is, of course, out of context. So I just want to point this out. This is not about what happened in 2000, but those who do not know what actually happened, they start, taking positions, which is fine. But this is much beyond a person who's been misguided. This is about the context, what happened then, what happened after that, and what happened after 9/11, and whether or not this was guided or misguided. It needs a discussion. Then this is not the forum for it.
Yes, brother Sami. I mean, we definitely need a discussion over this, because that's something that I'm not very forgiving. Not towards you personally, by the way, because you're not the only one who I think made that mistake. I understand your reasons. By the way, your reasons are extremely valid, based on what you gave support and you lobbied for George Bush the son. However, when you have a ticket that has George Bush, the butcher of Iraq, on one hand, and Dick Cheney, his defense secretary, I think it's misguided. If you can see that clearly of what is to come.
You insist.
Okay,
you
let me finish, brother.
I
did not interrupt, brother Sami. Let me. I did not interrupt. I'm the first one.
You placed.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish.
This program should finish. This program should finish. This is not what it is about. You're trying to do a dig at the end, and I let it go. And I just want to let people know that this is a very simplistic way of looking at it. That's all I'm saying. I'm not about to get engaged with you. Perhaps in the future we could do that. This is not the type. Now to start talking about Cheney and Bush and this and that. Cheney was not in power when we did this. So let's not get into this. This is about Palestine, about Gaza, and what we need to do. So going back and trying to make predictions and try to go back and make a general statement. I didn't want to engage in this actually now, because it's totally inappropriate. At one point we might. Thank you very much, brother.
Thank you, brother Sami. However, let me tell you, from a strategic perspective, if we're talking
No
about
problem.
politics,
Prof. Sami, Prof. Nidal, obviously this will.
let me just, I have the right to
obviously this will be a discussion for another program. We are obviously right.
Basically, I just only have 1 minute. If you look at history, everything you have to see it in historical context. Gaza today is paying the price for the 2000 administration.
Brother Bilal, just final thoughts from you. And we know this battle, this aggression has not only been fought militarily, but it's also to win the hearts and minds of the people. And you being a media person, being a journalist as well, and just looking at where we are, what we have been talking until now with regard to supporting the resistance from a media perspective. And I think this is very, very important. And particularly for us as Muslim media, we see it right across social media as well, independent media. What should we be focusing on?
Well, I think that a lot of the points that the brothers made were good points. We're going to have to focus, unfortunately, on the killing. That can't be relegated to the back burner, even though it's unpleasant. We also have to put forward the hypocrisy in order to mobilize the people, because the way people were thinking on October 7th, particularly in the West, was that, hey, well, Israel is our ally, so obviously they must be in the right. But I think a lot of those people now are starting to rethink their positions. I also want to say is that, go back to one point that Brother Nidal made. Coming up in a month is going to be the U.S. election. And, I absolutely hate Donald Trump. I cannot stand him. I'm from New York. I grew up 45 minutes away from where Donald Trump grew up. We know him better than most people do. And he's one of the absolute worst people that you would meet. Now, after having said that, If the Democrats were to win, that would send a message that would reverberate for many, many years. And that message would be, no matter what we do, even if it's a genocide, people will still vote for us. So there's no need to give Muslims or progressives anything, because they're still going to support us against the Republicans. And that's a very dangerous precedent to put forward. And I would encourage the people that if you are going to vote, that I would say put that vote with Jill Stein.
Well, Jazakallah khairan so much for that to you, Professor Sami Al-Arian out in Istanbul, Brother Bilal Abdul Karim joining us out of Syria, and also to you, Professor Nidal, Sakr, as always. We thank you all, Jazakallah, to all of you for your time, and we do appreciate you taking time out with us on Salam Media this evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of Wednesday Night with myself, Nightwadi. And I must say, most absorbing, but the key issue here at the end of the day, and the message that we need to take away from this is the general mobilization of Muslims is absolutely necessary. This is obligatory according to our ability. And as we head towards 1 year of this genocide that is playing out in Gaza, we need to continue. We cannot afford to stop. We need to be relentless. And we know a lot here is actually going to be planned over the next few days to commemorate the first anniversary of this genocide in Gaza. We at Salam Media will be doing it, and I'm sure many other organizations as well, right across South Africa and many other parts around the world. But the key issue here is interesting dynamics that are playing out right now. And last night was obviously with the Iranian missiles that went in deep into Israel territory, over 200. And again, today we've heard about Hezbollah as well, repelling this ground invasion. We've seen some video clips coming through, helicopters coming in, picking up injured Israeli soldiers in Lebanese territory, in southern Lebanon. So there is still a lot that is happening right now as we speak. But definitely we will provide a lot more information, a lot more coverage. But stay with us on Salam Media. But for now, for myself and the team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.